Now, when we look at relationships as a source of anxiety, this is a very difficult one, because there's so many different types of relationships and they can have such a huge impact on us. And it's very, very hard to generalize in a situation like this about how we should manage those relationships in a means that, or in a manner that's going to just reduce the anxiety. However, within those parameters, let's just look at some absolute basics. Now, the first is that any relationship with a spouse or a partner of any description, it should be a relationship which contributes to our life. It should be a relationship which provides a level of, in a sense, sustenance. But it's an emotional sustenance. We pair up with people because it's not just a case of lust, it's because we feel a support with them and we feel a kinship with them. Now, when one ceases to feel that, when the relationship starts to become based on something other than emotional support and respect, then there's clearly something wrong with the relationship. Now, the reason I say this, it may sound obvious, but there are many marriages out there which just carry on simply because no one can be bothered to end them, and obviously that's not quite right. So when we look at relationships, it's really important to evaluate the relationship in a somewhat dispassionate way. One way of doing this is to say, okay, how do I feel about this relationship? How do I feel about being with this person? And if at the end of each day you fill in a little number at the bottom of your day planner or your diary, a number between 1 and 5, where 5 is a really great day with her, I was really pleased I was with her, or for other people with him, whatever, and 1 is, oh my God, what am I doing here? Well, if after a month you take the average of all those numbers and the number is below 3, then frankly you shouldn't be in that relationship. And if it's above 3, then it's probably a relationship which is right. But the fact is, any relationship should make us feel positive, it should make us feel supported, and it should be a positive thing. Now, some people say, well, I want to stay together with the children, and I want to stay together for the children, or this sort of idea. Well, that's all very well, but remember what you're teaching the children. If the relationship's not quite right, remember what you're teaching the children. You're basically teaching them that an unacceptable relationship can be justified. Now, that's not the life most people want for their children. So, as difficult as this one is, looking at the relationship dispassionately and analysing it and understanding it for what it is it a contributor to anxiety or a negative situation, or is it a positive support? And looking at it in a reasonable and fair way. A lot of times people look at it over a period of about a month, and that gives them an idea. Now, you could make that shorter or you could make that longer. But at the end of the day, it becomes fairly obvious whether a relationship is a positive experience for you or a negative experience for you. And frankly, if it's a negative experience for you, you've pretty much got to address this. That means either putting it right or getting out of it. Now, the reason I say that is that it's such a huge part of our life. And being in a bad relationship does two things. Firstly, obviously, it affects you in a negative way. But secondly, it prevents you fulfilling yourself by having a positive relationship. Frankly, if there's someone in the co-pilot seat that's not the right person in the co-pilot seat, it's time to kick them out, even if you're still in flight. So, the right co-pilot can get into that place. Now, that is a tough one for some people to assimilate. But in the end, relationships are so important for us, and having positive relationships, feeling that validation of a mate or a supporter, a spouse, whatever you want to call them, who is a positive contribution, is so important for us that actually, if it isn't right, get out of it. It's better for everybody, and it's better for them as well. And frankly, when you discuss things in an absolutely reasonable way with each other, if you can put the point in a basic way, if they're really not happy in the relationship and you're really not happy in the relationship, well, that's not really, staying in that relationship isn't helping either of you. And there are some relationships which can be fixed. They can be worked through. but there has to be a great deal of will on both sides for that to happen. Once trust is lost, for instance, it really becomes very, very difficult. Now, ideally, these are things which can be done without too much fireworks. Obviously, there's plenty of times when those fireworks do come. But at the end of the day, if you're in a relationship which really isn't working, you're better out than in. And if you're in a relationship which really is working, then it's good to understand that and really work for it together. So analysing a relationship is a very important thing. And the only other thing I'll talk about here in relationships very briefly is the idea of family. The thing with family, a lot of people have the idea that you can choose your friends, you can't choose your family. Actually, that's not true. You can choose your family. And what you do is you choose how much access you allow to yourself from those other members of your family. So for instance, if there is a member of the family, either a parent or a sibling or even a child, who whenever you have any interactions with them, you come away feeling negative, well, you know what? It's time to close down that relationship a little bit. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you become estranged from them. That's definitely not the only way to do this. But it is not unreasonable to limit access a little. So instead of speaking to that parent who's always bullying or whatever, every 2 or 3 days on the phone, well, we have voicemail. Maybe it's time to go down to once a week or even once a month for a period until you can start to apply a level of respect and discipline into that relationship, where if that person really wants to be disparaging, then they're going to realise that it's going to be 6 weeks instead of a month before you next call them. And as they begin to learn, it's funny how very quickly they start to alter their behaviour. So, addressing relationships and being, in some instances, just a little bit ruthless, and it's cruel to be kind, but sometimes you need to do that. So, it's a case really of analysing a relationship. If it really is a negative relationship, then either limiting it or getting rid of it is pretty much what you need to do to reduce the stress in your own life. Now, one final point, which is the concept of a toxic relationship. There are some relationships where the man or the woman is desperately in love with their partner, and everything they live for seems to be for that partner. Their every waking breath is for that partner, and yet they're still absolutely miserable. Well, there are some relationships which really aren't meant to be. And as much as you might really want to be with that person, somehow you come away feeling miserable. Well, that's pretty much the toxic relationship. And there, it's not going to matter what you do, you're still going to come away feeling miserable. And at that point, it's kinder to everybody to walk away while you still at least feel something for the other person, rather than getting to the point where you just feel total dislike and disgust with them. Because that's ultimately where that goes. The frustration eventually becomes too much. So walking away from relationships, if they just don't feel right, is probably still the right thing to do. And who knows, maybe there'll be a second time around, who knows. But as a way of managing anxiety and as a way of dialing down some of the difficulties in life, managing those relationships is really, really key. Okay, well, I hope you found this helpful, and I'll be probably putting up further sessions into this system in the near future.